I'm actually going to start off here by explaining how the employee record interfaces with the solution, because unless you have an employee record set up that's compatible with the time clock, we can't even log in or get started. So I'm just going to show that first before we talk about the front end interface. So in the back end of NetSuite, within the employee list here, you can see some time clock demo employee records I've set up here. So the first thing that you need to know about setting up an employee record in the back end is that we have a custom form that needs to be used in order to get it to work with the solution. The reason for that is we have a couple extra fields, most important of which is the PIN by which employees log into that interface. So one thing to take note of here is the default department for this particular employee is processing. That'll come into play in a second when I go back over to the front end. Supervisor here is myself. That will also come into play when I show how the approval records work. Employee PIN. Yeah, right there. This is the PIN. You set it up in the back end, and this is how your employee is actually going to log into the front end of the solution. So I'll show you that now.
And Scott, just to make sure that they're unique, what we do is when you set it up, the employee record, it's going to use the social security number if you have them in the system. The last 4 digits is their PIN, or you can override it with, a manual PIN. And there's also an enforcement to make sure they're unique, because obviously you don't want 2 employees sharing the same PIN and both logging into the same account.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So like Michael said, on the front end here, they don't have a username and a password. It's just a simple 4-digit combination. So for this demo, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the employee can log in. So what you'll notice is that for this particular employee, you remember back on their back end record, their default department was processing, right? So since there isn't a time entry available for today, the department that will be defaulted to here is processing. So if you guys want to bill employee hours to different departments or see where employees are spending hours for analytics purposes, the employee can actually select their department within a drop down here for which department they're logging hours with. So like I said, no time entries for today, so it's going to default to processing. However, if I were to log into a different department like customer experience and clock in, when I open up the interface again, the department it's going to default to is going to be the one that has an open time entry for it. So even though this employee is part of the processing department, because they were last in the customer experience department, that's the one it's going to default to here. However, once it's closed out, right? So if I were to hit clock out here and then log back in, the employee's department that's going to open is going to be the default one on their back end record, which is processing. We also have different break codes like lunch or go on break. So the employee can clock in and out of those as well. And the other thing that's important about this interface is what it does in the back end, right? How are records created? What's the structure of those records? So when we clock in, that creates a time entry audit log record, which I'll show in a sec. And clocking out, the other punch, also creates a time entry audit log record. So those are located here. The best way to think about time entry audit logs is as the actual punch itself, and the time entry is the record of duration that is bookended by those time entry audit logs. So you can see, as we were just demoing a few seconds ago here, the time clock demo employee did punch into the customer experience department at 12:45 and punch out at 12:45, right? So those are our time entry audit log records. What those do is the first one that's open creates a time entry. That's our record of duration. So if I go over here and refresh the page, what we're going to see is that a time entry was created in the current pay period for that employee, right? So they clocked in and out at the same time, so the duration is 0 hours. However, you can have employees that maybe clock into a particular department and forget to clock out, we do have validation processes on the time entry audit, or excuse me, the time entry approval record that will allow supervisors to be notified of those discrepancies so they can fix them before they're approved and end up having an impact on your payroll. Does that make sense so far?
Makes sense so far. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Real quick.
Go back to the time and open it up.
Open it, yeah.
Yep, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's, if you click custom real quick,
yep,
custom tab, you'll see the audit logs are here. So like Mark said, they're basically just the punches, and a single time entry record, or excuse me, 2 punches complete a single time entry record. Time entries are usually what you're dealing with, and the audit log is just literally their timestamp for when they punched in.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yep. So when we reach the end of a pay period, a approval record is created for all unapproved time entries in that pay period. So in this case, because we're not at the end of this pay period here, it's set up as ending on Saturday, I believe. I set up a demo approval record here. So first, I'm going to show you what the approval record would look like to your supervisors in the back end before it's approved. So this is one I created for this week. It's not going to have the current ones in it because I ran the script manually. But what we can see is that we have our employees in here with their actual time entries. So in the sub tab, we have a sub list of the time entries in the pay period that are associated with this approval record. So this is what your supervisors are seeing. They'll see that, okay, we got this employee, it has a successful time entry, but as we can see with the notification up here, there are incomplete time entries in need of review. That's what I was talking about before, where somebody punches in, doesn't punch out. Now we can see that right in this sub list here, but we also have a list that just shows the incomplete ones. So you don't have to go sifting through all these because it's pretty easy to see where somebody didn't clock out when you only got 2 time entries. Well, and you got 10 people doing, 6 or 8 punches a day. This gets pretty long. So this is for the supervisor to find where those incomplete entries are and correct them. So talk to the personnel that made this time entry and close it out, or if it was not supposed to be started, just delete it. And in addition to that, we can also find which employees didn't log a time entry for the entire week. So we had time clock demo 1 making a successful time entry, time clock demo 2 started a time entry here but didn't close it out, and then time clock demo 3, this employee didn't actually log any time for the week. So that's something that the supervisor can also look at for accountability purposes.
Yeah, it could be, in that scenario, Scott, maybe you've got an employee that is out on vacation and, so they didn't clock in and out at all that week. But maybe somebody, I don't know, there was something wrong and they didn't clock in and out, or maybe they're new to the job. So this is just telling the supervisor, hey, these employees had no punches. Is that correct?
Yeah, does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, that's not a bad thing to have, actually.
Sweet.
Keeps everything straight.
Yeah, so on this particular approval record, you'll see that no time entries are approved because we haven't run that yet. But now I'll show you what it looks like when the time entry approval record is approved. So that'll be this guy here. In order for the approval record to actually go through, your supervisor will have to hit edit on this and hit that they have reviewed time entry exceptions. That's an accountability measure to make sure that they actually have looked at this. And then when they hit approve all entries, which is a button that appears here, which you can see on this guy, review all incomplete entries, right? That's these guys here. And then they can review all entries, which brings you to this guy here. And then they hit the approve button. That'll make the record look like this. So this is a previous week that I made. You'll see that this checkbox turns to a check for approved by supervisor, and all the time entries in the record move to being approved. Then what will happen after that's done, our payroll timesheets will actually be created. So for this particular pay period from July 19th to July 25th, we can go into our weekly timesheets and see that the MapReduce script actually associated these timesheets for time clock demo 1 and 2 with that approval record, and that those hours are actually in the timesheets. So you can go in there and then verify that, yep, the hours in there that were associated with different departments and for specific durations during specific days actually are in payroll. And we can do that for different payroll items, depending on which ones you want the employee to have back in their employee record here. So I just set up a test payroll item of wages, but if you want to have different ones in there for different employees, we can do that too.
Yeah, so Scott, the time entry approval, the time entries, all that stuff, they're all just custom records. None of it actually hits payroll until they're approved. And they actually can't even approve it until all those incomplete entries are cleaned out. It will disallow them because you can't have open-ended time entries, right? How do you process that in terms of payroll? So it makes sure that everything's clean, the data is clean, and then it automatically is going to create those timesheets, which then feed into the payroll.
Yeah, and I suppose the last thing to touch on that note is if you have some issues where the payroll timesheets were already ran and that you need to edit some time entries to this pay period and approve them, in retrospect, the supervisor can hit edit here, hit the checkbox for rerunning payroll timesheets, and then these guys here will be re-updated with the current information for that approval record. But Michael, is there anything I missed there that you want me to touch on?
Can you click on the summary subtab?
Yeah, for sure.
So this is going to give you a high-level overview of the employee. That time entry subtab is giving you the detail level, and you could filter by employee. But this is going to list your employees and show for each day of the week what their total hours were. Also, if they had any time off hours, we have that over there. If you use the time off request functionality in NetSuite, that's another piece of this that we could include. If not, no big deal. And then also, if you click payroll, the payroll tab, so the timesheets will show up under here as well. So when everything's approved and the timesheets are created, these are what feed into payroll. They're going to show up here on this time entry approval record. Lastly, all of this is also visible on the individual employee record. So if you go to the employee record, you'd be able to see, the time entries created for them, the time audit log, the payroll timesheets, all that information you can see at the employee level.
I guess one last thing to end this off. This may be trivial, but on this front end, we can definitely replace this guy here with your logo. So that's always nice to have as far as customizability goes.
Perfect.
Yeah, and Scott, some of this might not be relevant. Like, one thing you could do. So we have button validation here, where it forces you to clock in or clock out based on if you recently clocked in or whatever. If you clocked in and then you log in again, it's not going to let you clock in twice. However, we have
you can't overlap yourself. Okay.
Right. We do have some functionality though, like where if you were to change department, because sometimes clients have employees that work for multiple departments and they want to log their time per department. So if you were to select a different department than your last time entry, it will allow you to clock in and automatically clock you out of the last department.
And then to get to this screen, they obviously just log into their NetSuite and create a favorite for it or something like that?
Yeah, I suggest we can create a shortcut on shortcut link in NetSuite, or actually it can be accessed outside of NetSuite, so you can make a bookmark in the browser. We did it that way because some clients use this like on an iPad to clock in and out. Multiple employees are maybe not every employee has their own desk and computer. Maybe you have warehouse employees or something that don't use a computer really. So this could go on an iPad and you just have this screen set up on there and you can log in and out from it.